Coach Robb podcast, answering questions and eliminating frustrations about health, wellness, and performance since 1987.
Welcome to the Coach Robb podcast. This is episode number 64. Success isn't accidental nor guaranteed. Coach Robb, how are we doing this Friday morning?
Hey, man. Good morning to you. And as I say at the beginning of every show, thank you for carving out some time in your Friday. I am always appreciative of it. And I'm really looking forward to this subject, as I say every time, because each one of these shows keeps building on each other. So I'm excited to talk about this here today.
Well, and I want to thank the listeners and everybody viewing on YouTube as well. Thank you guys so much for supporting our show and following us and sending your questions and your comments. And if you haven't, make sure you guys like and share our channel here, and that'd help us out.
Absolutely. And if I may elaborate on that, thank you so much for the comments. A lot of people will DM me for whatever reason. They're not comfortable leaving messages on YouTube. So I want to say thank you for that as well. We'd love to engage with everybody. And even as we get the show started, Dan, want to make sure if there's somebody new that's watching, please understand you can reach out to us and ask any question you want. You can do that by sending a question to contact@coachrobb.com. And it may take us a day or two to get back to you, but I absolutely promise you we will. So if you're new to the show, thank you and welcome. And if you've been with us since day one, welcome back. It's good to have you. Good to see you again.
We're as the listeners know that we're just average Joes. I mean, you, Coach Robb, you're like a legend. So, I mean, you're big time, big money.
I don't know about that. I appreciate the kind words. Like you and I always say, we just want to make a difference one person at a time. And as much as I enjoy the YouTube platform and just even Google in general, unfortunately, there seems to be probably more misinformation than there is accurate information. And I don't want to sound like a political soapbox, but usually the misinformation is being motivated by an agenda. And that agenda, of course, always resonates back to money. So that's a whole thing that I enjoy about the show is we're not here to try to sell anybody anything, just try to create some level of awareness and then try to change the perspective a little bit and try to break through the quagmire of misinformation that does exist out there.
I always seem to get my little shameless plug in though for Energy Fuel because I love that stuff. So
no, I'm glad that you enjoy it. I was actually talking to a client earlier this week about it. He said, "Why do you have so many different flavors?" And I thought it was a pretty interesting question. The reason why we have so many different flavors is like in our endurance world, if you're training for an Ironman or a marathon or a 5K, 10K or a sprint triathlon, if you're training for a gravel bike race or a mountain bike race, you know how you train on something for so long, and then by the time the race gets here, you're so burnt out on that particular flavor of that product. What I wanted to share with our listeners here today is if you look at the formulation of the product, it never deviates. And that's very important because we look at calories, the electrolyte content, the ratios of all the electrolytes. But the idea of, hey, you may train on lemon lime, but you want to race on watermelon, you want to race on grape, but you train on, orange. That's the whole idea there, especially for those of us that go through a lot of energy fuel on a weekly basis because we do train and ride and do so much that we've got to keep those electrolytes high. But I thought it was a very interesting question. Why do you have 8 flavors? Just to keep it changed up. But the formulation and what it's designed to do calorie wise, like some of the formulas are designed to be very short and fast, high intensity. That formulation doesn't change just because a flavor does. So I thought it was an interesting question and thought I'd bring that to the conversation. Different perspective once again.
Well, I'm a creature of habit. The pink lemonade is what I go to, but I'll have to try some of these other flavors because they do sound good.
Yeah.
All right, now that I got my shameless Energy Fuel plug out of the way this episode, Coach Robb, let's get into it. Success is not accidental and nor is it guaranteed. And we've talked about this before. There's really 4 quadrants of life, and that's personal, professional, financial, and athletic. I'll let you touch on that real quick and just kind of give the listeners an overview of those 4 quadrants.
Absolutely. And again, this is for the people who may be new to the podcast. When you think about every single moment of your thoughts, they're going to fall into one of those 4 categories, plain and simple. You're either thinking about your family, you're thinking about your job, your finances, or your health and well-being. Nothing that we go through on a daily basis falls outside of that quadrant of those 4 elements. So when we're looking at the idea of success, and I've said this on the show before, what I find so fascinating on this side of the podcast is when somebody commits to, let's say they pick up the phone and they call us when they make a commitment to health and performance, it's interesting that commitment mirrors what's going on personally and financially. It's almost across the board. We call it cross germination of success. And you look at somebody like yourself, you have a great relationship. Well, your finances probably emulate your relationship in the sincerity and how serious you take that relationship. You realize success, I say this all the time, marriages are not 50-50, they're 100%, 100%. It's 100% commitment on behalf of both people. Well, your commitment, if you're spending time and you're sharing time with us here on this podcast together, you are dedicating a portion of your time. I understand the opportunity cost of time to try to be better. And so that probably is going to resonate over in your financial side of things. Maybe your finances have been in disarray and you're making a commitment to save more and spend less. You see how it all cross germinates, but it all comes back to the same 4 quadrants of life. And that's, Dan, you've been married a long time, and so have I. The bottom line is we know that success just doesn't fall in our lap. That's why the title of this podcast, it's never guaranteed. We can all make mistakes and screw it up, but it's not accidental either. Just doing the right thing. What is that? You and I spoke about it before. If life is hard, you're living it right. If life is easy, you're living it wrong. And
That's
I
right.
think fitness is this. Now, I want to be very careful as I say that, because I don't want everybody to think that you've got to be completely in misery to be fit. In fact, I think it's the exact opposite, but we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little.
Yeah. And the real thing, right, is you cannot manage your time. You can only manage yourself. And time is going to click away no matter what. And it's up to you what you do with that time.
Well, and I think this is going to resonate with our subscribers that are coming back, and maybe they've listened to our previous podcast together. When you stop and you think about the clock doesn't wait for anybody. If you're somebody that's followed me for any period of time, let's say that you started listening to me 5 years ago, how much progress have you made in 5 years? I never want our podcasts. It's very important to me that our podcasts are not repetitive. Sure, there might be some overlapping subjects, but when we're looking at the sole subject of, hey, how much progress have you made since the last time you watched one of our podcasts 2 weeks ago? How much have you made since the beginning of the year? How much have you made since you first heard us talk 5 years ago? So that's the big $1 million question. If you can't manage time and you recognize you can only manage yourself, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, how did yesterday go for you? If you go and you look at those 4 quadrants of life, and this is something that I get so much enjoyment with, because even some of the most successful, wealthiest individuals that I work with, when I say wealthy, running their own businesses, successful athletes, 10, $15 million a year income, no problem whatsoever. What is so interesting is the management of time, believe it or not, is not always their strongest asset. And that's why I wanted to dive into this on this podcast today, because when I'm talking to successful people and they have a mental epiphany and they go, gosh, I never really thought about the value of sleep. This is a huge one. A lot of people don't realize. Dan, let me change the subject just for a moment, and I'm going to put you in the catbird seat for the sake of our listeners.
Sure.
A lot of people don't realize what all you do on a weekly basis. You're a dad, you're a husband, you have multiple jobs, you have multiple responsibilities. If you took somebody fresh out of college and you dropped them into your marriage, you've got a child, you've got a job, right? You've got all those, I don't want to call them burdens, but let's just call them a burden just for a general terminology. Let's call them responsibilities. They're not a burden. So when you take somebody that's fresh out of high school or maybe out of college and you drop them into a 10-year marriage, how easy is that? They have no idea how hard it's going to be.
They would be running for the hills.
Absolutely, right? If we go and we take somebody fresh out of college and we drop them into the responsibilities that you have, let's just choose one of your jobs at the college, for example, or maybe one of your media responsibilities that literally is a 7-day-a-week job, never stops. There's always something going on. It seems really cool from the outside until you dive into it. And the thing that I always get told, man, I didn't realize it was going to be this hard. One of the shows that I enjoyed, this was back when it first came out, was Survivor. And it's interesting when you hear people are like, I'm a big fan of the show, and they get out there and they're like, what do they always say? I can't believe it's this hard. And if we take, for the sake of our listeners, if we took your financial situation, whether it's cash strong or you're living paycheck to paycheck, take a young athlete or take a young individual out of high school and say, okay, I need you to balance my checkbook. I'm stealing from Peter to pay Paul. I'm just using the worst case scenario because anybody who's on financial struggle bus realizes it takes a lot more energy when you're barely getting by because you're constantly moving it around versus somebody who has a lot of money that just says, hey, look, I can write a check for all my bills and I still have many left in the bank, but they still have to take the time. Well, a lot of these young kids don't know how to do that. And then if you look at the athleticism, anybody who's relatively decent as an athlete, they make it look easy. Dan, for the sake of people who follow us in the motocross arena, how many times have we joked about the idea that any pro, whatever your favorite color and rider is, they make it look so easy. And you go, well, if I had that works bike or if I had that factory bike, I could go as fast as they can. I guarantee you can't even come remotely close. Whether that's stiff suspension, extremely powerful motor, all the above.
You would go slower than you would on your bike in the garage.
There you go. Now, for the sake of the listeners, imagine that your job in all of its elements, let's say you have 10 responsibilities, and then you're married and you have 10 responsibilities, and you're a parent, you have 10 responsibilities, and you have a financial responsibility for your family, maybe your company. You have 10 responsibilities for each of those. Now, each responsibility is represented as a rock, and you've got a backpack on, Dan. You're carrying 10 of those in your marriage, 10 in your job, 10 in your athleticism, 10 in your financial, and yet we become desensitized to it. So when somebody who's followed us for any period of time comes back and goes, yeah, I heard Rob talk about it, cool, but don't stop listening. How much progress have you made since the last time we briefly spoke about this? Because if we don't start to learn how to manage the rocks in our backpack, this is where time management is so powerful. Time doesn't wait for anybody. If you guys are willing to give up, as we said earlier, an opportunity cost of listening to us for an hour, we deeply appreciate it. But we want to make sure that you walk away with an aha moment, with maybe a slight perspective change. And if we create a perspective that you don't agree with, we want you to send us a question and let's get a conversation going. But that's, Dan, why I always say we can't manage time. We can only manage ourselves. And I'm going to kind of be a little bit negative. So please, everybody, be patient. What about those dreaded New Year's resolutions? Here we are, the year's 3/4 of the way over, right? How long did it take for 90% of our listeners to go, well, screwed those over? Probably before they got to February.
Yeah.
And that's where time management's at.
It is. And New Year's, I hate New Year's resolutions. Anytime anybody says, I got a New Year's resolution, it's like, okay, well, you're going to fail because you're doing it for the wrong reason. You're doing it because you feel like you have to have something due to improve yourself on January 1st, which is so dumb. In fact, like most of the time when I say like, oh, I'm going to start a new diet or I'm going to, start eating cleaner on Monday, it's like, who am I kidding? That's not going to work. So it's like, there's never a bad time to say, you know what, I'm going to change what I'm doing right now. I mean, that's really when stuff sticks, is when it's not planned and it's seat of the moment, like I'm going to make a change right now.
And what you just said is so powerful because when you say to yourself, and our listeners say it to themselves, that's it, I'm going to make a change. Until that mental shift happens, it's just a nebulous conversation. It's a set of goals that are written down on a piece of paper for the umpteenth time that are essentially going to get obliterated. So let's take this entire subject and let's change it yet another degree. Let's change the perspective just a slight degree. When somebody gets to February and March and they go, well, you bring up the big one, right? The multi-billion-dollar business of weight loss in January. You get to February and you go, well, I screwed the pooch on that one. Once again, I'm going to be fat. What I want to do is, instead of using the word goals and objectives, I want you to replace it with the word frustrations. Please don't write on a piece of paper goals and objectives, because everybody wants to be healthy. Everybody wants to be in a happy relationship. Everybody wants to be financially secure. Everybody wants to enjoy their job. We are designed to work, plain and simple, right? We need to work in our relationships. We need to be productive at work. We need to work on being healthy. Make a list of the things in all those categories. If you're going to tell me you're in a really poor relationship, I get it. I totally respect that. Let's change the conversation. You make me a list of what would be an ideal relationship and then go get it. Now, my goal and my prayer would always be that you and your partner can figure it out, because going through a divorce and breaking up of relationships is extremely difficult. What I want you to do is reverse the conversation. My relationship sucks. What would you like your relationship to be? If, as you know, Dan, and most of the listeners know, I was married for 25 years. I tried forever to try to match what somebody else wanted me to be. And every time I tried to get there, the target just kept moving, right? Perfect example. And again, I'll take responsibility. I never made date night a priority, never. And that was brought to my attention through counseling. Just for transparency, I was married 25 years. I was in counseling for 15. So, okay, I realized the importance of date night. I go to date night and the date night wasn't good enough. It wasn't at the right place. I didn't talk about the right things. I didn't wear the right cologne. So the target kept getting moved, right? And then finally, I hate to admit it, I got tired of trying. My point in bringing this up is not to air my dirty laundry. Once I went through my divorce, and it was very tumultuous, it lasted over 5 years, I did know what I want going forward. And that's what I want to challenge anybody who's in a bad relationship right now. I empathize. I've been there. It sucks. But how about making a list of what you do want? And I have permission to say this from my wife, Michaela. When we first started dating, we made a deal with one another. Number one, no gray zones. Don't say it unless you mean it. And if you don't mean it, don't say it. But if you say it, I'm going to trust it. The second thing was, once I knew what I was looking for, we had this internal joke or this constant joke going was neither one of us were going to compromise for the sake of just being comfortable in a relationship to say we were in a relationship. She had her needs, wants, and desires, and I had my needs, wants, and desires. And we worked and we still continue to work on making sure that those are constantly in alignment with one another because people grow and people change. But the problem comes when one person changes and the other one's not aware of it. And now you've got a set of railroad tracks that derail. Does that make any sense, Dan, at any level?
It does, definitely. Definitely does.
If we look at the relationship side, instead of telling me, and this is what goes back to what you said that I thought was so profound, a diet at the end of the year becomes a goal and an objective that inevitably gets the failure rate is 99.99%, when really what it should be is, why are you frustrated with your weight? I'm fat. Okay. Why is it that you're fat? Is it an eating habit? Is it high stress levels? If it's high stress levels, is that coming from relationships at work? See, what we want to do is always come back. You and I have had some great conversations with our subscribers here. We've talked about what stress will do. It will make you fat because of cortisol. All right. So if we go and we look at finances and we look at relationships and we look at our jobs and we look at athleticism, if you're fat and you're exercising and destroying yourself with high intensity interval training, you're only adding to your fatness. Do you see this paradigm shift? Because we go back to managing time. If you're going to tell me that the reason why you failed, air quotes here for those that are listening to this on a podcast and not on YouTube, if you're going to tell me in February that you failed meeting your diet goals and objectives, I'm going to reverse the conversation and ask you, what frustrations can you not overcome? Which ironically brings us back to time management. I don't have time to go to the gym. Okay, let's work on finding some time. All right, I don't have time to go to the grocery store, so inevitably I run through a drive-through. Fair enough. Let's find some time to go to the grocery store. Let's also find some time to actually cook the food that you bought at the grocery store, and let's find some time to pack the food that's left over from your meal that you prepped so you have it for lunch tomorrow. So then I'm going to ask you for tomorrow, when are you actually going to sit down and eat your lunch? I'm hoping that this is starting to resonate. Please tell me if it's not making any sense at all.
No, it does. And I sit here thinking, because I know how I am and I know how most people are, and then I know how you are. is you know, for the listeners that probably don't know this, Coach Robb is the most, I don't know how to explain this exactly, but you have your schedule down to a T. You know tonight what you're doing at 6:00, and you are so diligent on making sure that you stick to the schedule. It's incredible, but it's allowed you to do the things and get to the places where you want to be in life today because you have been able to master that time management.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, but let me empower the listeners to this podcast. If you stop and you think about what would be your idea of fill in the blank, a perfect bank account. What does a perfect relationship look like? What does a perfect fitness level look like? What does the perfect job look like? And then compare that to how you spent yesterday. How big of a gap is that? Now, I'm not naive. I've got 3 children. We own a few companies, right? Nothing just happens. It all is, and I hate to use a textbook cliche here, right? But those who fail to plan to fail. And this is where I think it's very, very interesting because I try to encourage people of all ages to start their own businesses. If you know anything about our economy, the majority of our gross domestic income comes from the tax revenue comes from private business owners. And so I want everybody to have the luxury of having the freedom of time. Whenever an entrepreneur comes to me and I'm encouraging them how to set up their framework of their business, and I always say to them, hey, Dan, why do you want to convert your side hustle into a full-time job? And 99% of the time, the answer is the same. I want more money and I want free time. And I say, well, I've got bad news for you. You're going to have neither when you start your business
Yeah.
because you're working a side hustle. And the idea here is, and this is where we get into a little bit of the deep psychological side of success. Yes, you're going to have to put a timeline together that says, all right, for the next, I'm going to use a very loose number, the next 18 months, I've only found, and this is where we come back to the calendar. When I look at my typical week, day by day, cumulative Monday through Sunday, I've found that I've got 30 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, and I have 2 hours Saturday and Sunday. Perfect. So you found yourself 5.5 hours that you now can go and you can start to work your side hustle. But what do we do as human beings, Dan? You're pissed off because you don't have 10 hours.
Yeah.
So this is where we can't manage time. We can only manage ourselves. So when you go and I do this all the time with my entrepreneurs, pick up your phone and look at how much screen time you've been sitting on social media. So when you tell me you need an extra 15 minutes a day, don't waste your time looking at social media. It isn't going to improve your bank account, isn't going to improve your health, isn't going to improve your relationship, and it's not going to help you on your side hustle. Now, if social media is part of your side hustle, obviously. But I'm saying when it kills me, Dan, Michaela and I will be at the gym and somebody will be sitting on a machine and they're sitting there sliding. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? At least get off the machine and let somebody else use it.
Yeah.
But this is where I do appreciate your kind words. Literally, I live and die by my calendar. And it was actually a big bone of contention in my previous marriage because the sarcastic comment was, do I have to get on your calendar for us to go to date night? And the answer was unequivocally yes. Now, I'm married to Michaela. And if you look at my calendar, with our membership area, we do 2 live webinars a month. On the Wednesdays that we don't do live webinar, literally on my computer, it says, ride bicycle to town with Michaela for Acoustic Wednesday. Because Jennifer will get busy, I'll get busy, and we'll plan something right across. Next thing I'm leaving the office at 7 o'clock at night. But as it is now, I get to that 5:15, 5:30. I leave the office, we get on our mountain bikes and we ride to town. It has to be that detailed because if you take what we said a little bit ago, how do I expect my relationship to be good if I don't plan? If you want to use the word, I use it all the time. If I don't invest in Michaela, my relationship with Michaela is not going to just miraculously get better. That's why I wanted to title this podcast rather, Success Isn't Accidental, but it's not guaranteed either.
Yeah.
So this is what's the only thing we're guaranteed to do is manage ourselves. Now, granted, Dan, you've had situations where Sabrina's been sick or your daughter's been sick. That's an impromptu interruption, but you're a dad in a very positive way. You embrace that. You're like, okay, that's what I'm here for. I'm a hunter-gatherer provider. We're not stripping the integrity of women away. We're not stealing their independence. Big burly dudes that want to be hunters, providers, protectors. So now, guess what? I don't get to go to the track today. I don't get to go to the gym today because my daughter is sick and I need to stay home with her. That's an investment. That's not a sacrifice.
Yeah. And you learn, right? You learn over time to adapt and how to shift things around. And that's all part of learning, right? And putting your priorities. The one thing I wanted to go back to the listeners with is, you have to ask yourself, what does your perfect day look like, right? Like in a perfect world, who would you spend your time with? What would you do with the time that you have? What would you eat and drink? What would you eat and drink if everything was perfect, right? and then go back and, and write it down. If you have to write it down, what that perfect day looks like, and then reflect on, what today or yesterday looked like, and then figure out where the gaps are, right? Figure out where you have to make those adjustments, and find the time within those four quadrants that we talked about at the beginning of the show, right? Find the time in those quadrants to get yourself to where you want to be. And it doesn't, I think the biggest thing to drive home here is it just doesn't happen, right? And I think we've kind of said that multiple times here. You have to plan and you have to do it, but it just doesn't happen. And you have to be aware that that you have to make a change.
It goes, yeah, if you don't mind, I want to add an extra dynamic to what you just said. The change isn't going to happen until we start finding some time to make a change. I know that sounds very rhetorical, but I like the way that you articulated that, because it's like, if you want to change in your relationship, like you said, if you're independently wealthy, what would you even do tomorrow? We are hardwired to be productive. We are hardwired to be social. What would you do? Because if we take almost the same illustration that we did with the relationship, okay, if only I had X amount of money, well, how much is X? Stop and really think about that. For some people, they need to have $10 million a year. And they've got their own reasons why. I don't care what the number is. And then if you go through each one of these quadrants, right? You wake up independently wealthy tomorrow. What would you get up and do? And if anyone's listening to this pod, pause the pod and just stop and ponder that idea. If you woke up independently tomorrow, what would you do? And I'm going to call out the women here, because I bring this up to women all the time, especially when I do corporate presentations on corporate wellness. Women go out of their way, and I don't want that to be a broad spectrum statement amongst everybody, but most women were raised with the idea of the dream relationship, the guy, the partner that's on the white horse, that meets all the needs, knows what you need before you even open your mouth. Okay. How does that compare to where you're at now? Now, again, I'm very, very in tune with the idea that the person that you and I are right now, Dan, has been shaped by our previous experiences. We understand that. I always use the example of a wooden fence post. I understand if a female has been hurt physically, emotionally, there's a lot of elements associated with hurt. Well, that's a nail in the wooden fence post. And sure, you and I, Dan, can come over and we can pull that nail out. We respect that the hole is still in there. And that hole can only be filled when it is filled with love and consistency and respect and honor and all that goes with it, right? So now a female, and by the way, this could go male to female, female to male, whatever. What I'm saying is, it's very easy to say my relationship sucks. But yet when I turn it around, I go, okay, Mr. or Mrs., what is the ideal relationship? And then you can't even tell me. So what you're doing is, you haven't even told me what you want, but you're doing a great job of telling me what the other person isn't doing. And by the way, this can go in, I hate my boss. Well, you haven't sought out what your perfect day is for a way to feel productive, whether that's making money or whether it's rocking babies to sleep at the hospital. Everybody's got to find what's important. Again, I know you don't get paid thousands of dollars to rock babies. My point is, that's like you said earlier, Dan, it's that commitment, but the commitment has to be met with time. If you've stuck with us this far in today's podcast, or you listen to some of our previous podcasts, you're committed to some level of change. Well, if we stop and we say to ourselves, okay, what's the commitment of change? Well, nobody that's listening to this podcast would say, you know what, I love hitting a drive-through every day. And let's just assume the drive-through is garbage food, okay? Because I get it. Some Chipotles have a drive-through, and that's not total garbage food. Just from the sake of context, stop and picture, why would somebody drive through a drive-through, Dan? They look over in the front seat of their car or their truck and they go, shoot, I don't have that cooler. Okay, that's number one. So you hit the drive-through. Well, why is the cooler not there? You got to back time up. See a consistent theme here? Now we back time up. You're trying to get out of the house this morning, trying to get your kids to school. You took and you woke up a half hour early, and you went into the refrigerator, There's nothing to make lunch with. There's no reheats in the refrigerator from last night's dinner because you probably ate out dinner last night because you were tight on time and you devoured everything that you brought home. So the cooler not being in the front of the truck is because there was nothing in the refrigerator. Now back that up. Why is there no food in the refrigerator? Because you haven't had time to go to the grocery store. You back that time up. Now you say to yourself, I couldn't get away from work early enough to get to the grocery store, to come home, to cook it, to pack it, to have it in the cooler. We're looking at it in real time as we hit the drive-through because there's no cooler, when the problem was yesterday afternoon at 4:45 when you're getting ready to leave the office. And that's where if you don't mind me jumping into something, I'd like to encourage all of our listeners I use Microsoft Outlook. So literally, and I know you were being very kind, I do get mocked incessantly about my calendar. Okay. But the reason why I'm so particular about it is because it makes it easy for my wife to know, like if she wants to plan, can we go to the theater on Friday night? She just needs to know what time I'm done on Friday. So my calendar is always accurate. I know this sounds really bad, but even when my kids were little, we had an agreement at 5 o'clock. I closed my office door, and at 5:01, we were outside 100% guaranteed. My kids depended on it. And I won't say they held me to it because I held myself more accountable to it than them. But I want you to stop and think about this. The confidence I created in my kids were, well, just 10 more minutes, buddy. Hey, just 10 more minutes. And then now it's 6:30. Hey, man, just 10 more minutes. And now it's too dark to be outside. And then they're like, well, Dad said we were going out at 5 and now I don't. So what have I done? I've jeopardized the confidence in what I say to my kids. Hey, at 5 o'clock, we're going outside. Now reverse that. I have one of my sons is I coached all my kids soccer. I love to coach, as you guys can imagine, but I'm not trying to be a helicopter parent. I just love to push kids and challenge them and get them to think a little bit differently. My younger son, for whatever reason, was petrified of storms. I live in Orlando, Florida. 5:15, you can set your clock to it. We have thunderstorms coming in. So when we're at the soccer field, I'd be sitting there coaching and everything else. My youngest son would come over to me and we had an agreement. He would come up and he would just touch my leg. I would finish saying what I'm saying. I would excuse myself and I would take him to the car. He just wanted to be in the car during a thunderstorm. Now, when I say thunderstorm, we're not sitting out there coaching with the lightning coming down, but like any storm that comes in, they have storm alarms that come off. But my son never, ever doubted that when he came over, he didn't have to start pulling on my shirt. He didn't have to start, Dad, Dad. And it gets louder, right? And then the dad snaps, I'm talking. Well, the child's shaking in his boots. He's petrified of the storm. Respect, he has a fear of the storm. So I'm going to always meet his expectations because he was honest and, especially as a young man, I can handle anything. No, he's like, I'm petrified, Dad. These things are horrible. I don't know where it comes from. That's not the point. Your son's telling you he's tired, he's scared. My son needs to have confidence that when he touches my leg, I'm going to finish what I'm saying within a second, within a minute, and then I'm immediately going to take him to the car.
Yeah.
Now, take that into an interpersonal relationship. And Michaela calls me out on that, and I say that very lovingly because she had some bad relationships. Don't tell me you love me, show me you love me. Don't tell me you want to be in shape, show me you want to be in shape. Don't tell me you want to be financially secure, show me. And that's what comes back to time management. How am I ever going to show somebody that I care enough to take the time to meet you, to consistently put a show together? Sure, we have some interruptions. We have life things that go on. I'll go so far as to say, I want to build the confidence in our subscribers where they go, you know what? These guys get a show caught on Friday. They try to get it produced by the following Monday. I want to earn their trust and their confidence. How do I do it? Through consistency. How do I create consistency? It's on the calendar.
Yep.
So when someone says to me, hey, my job sucks, turn it around and go, well, what would be the perfect job? And then just go try to build it. It's going to take time. And especially, this is another area that I find there's a lot of people that are running their own businesses and they're very successful, but kind of the novelty of it's worn off, which doesn't make sense for somebody who looks at a successful person and goes, well, who cares if you don't like your job? You're doing well financially. You got a nice car, a nice house, beautiful wife. Well, because for him, or her, doesn't matter what the gender is, the challenge isn't there anymore. It's become mundane and boring. And this is where I want to challenge the listeners on rewards. Stop and think about this, Dan. If we go back and we stop and we think about the subject of, okay, I'm going to commit to building my perfect day, personally, professionally, financially, and athletically. And we'll come back to how to make that happen here in just a moment. Because if you're new to our podcast, we don't ever just talk about the problem. We want to build the framework and then provide solutions to it. That can be done, like you said earlier, Dan, tomorrow, right now, as soon as you watch this pod.
Yep.
But I want to go to rewards. And this is super, super important. When we work with a top level executive, and they own their own businesses and they're doing great financially, and their health is there, like I said, their family life, everything is good. Someone who, as you said earlier, Dan, they don't know what all that person does on a daily basis to make that company successful, but they're jealous of it. They're like, well, oh, it must be nice to not want to do that job, even though you don't have to really struggle. You've got to change your perspective. It's no longer about the struggle, it's about the reward. Because if you talk to anybody who's successful financially, money is not the object. Someone starts a business, it was to build something, a product or a service. So if you start to reverse engineer the success and then the rewards, and that's what I want to challenge everybody, and I'm going to self-confide here. We're getting ready to launch a corporate wellness program. Our goal was to try to get it up by October 1st. Well, we finished that about 6 weeks early. So what I had committed to Michaela was whenever we get the corporate wellness program finalized, we're going to go to Costa Rica for 2 weeks. And the reason being is that's my reward system. My oasis is the beach. Anyone who's followed me for any period of time knows that. Well, Michaela and I have been to Costa Rica. The food is second to none. It's all caught. Everything is fresh. Literally the fruit and vegetable truck pulls up to the grocery store every single morning, and it's on the little back of a pickup truck. The grocery store is probably 300 square feet total. The reason why I bring it up is when you eat their food, you feel different. When you realize you're not waking up to a phone and you're not waking up to literally an alarm, you're waking up to the sun, it just can't be replaced. You go, Rob, that's nice. Good for you. Please don't go there. That's not what I'm saying. When I was working my tail end off, and there's times I'm working on projects that are just boring, right? What motivates me is my reward that I know when I get it done, that Michaela and I are going to go to Costa Rica to the point that I'll work harder to get it done because of the reward. And I want the listeners to, again, pause the pod. What is your reward system? Why do you get up and go to work? Why do you stay in your relationship? Why do you go to the gym? Or for some people, why are you not going to the gym? Because a lot of times, and we have recently rescued a dog. And if I take a treat and I tease that dog over and over and over again, and I never give him the treat, how long is it going to take before that dog's like, screw you? I'm not even getting off the couch because you're not going to give it to me. And I want to talk specifically to the men because we're raised that we're supposed to never have a problem, right? We're the matriarch of the family. We're supposed to have broad shoulders. We're supposed to be able to take anything that the world has to give us. Well, we get tired and we don't have people to go talk to, and we don't have things that we don't have resources that we can go to. And we're not saying that in a complaining way, but it's the same thing with a reward, because here's what men do. If I just had X amount of dollars, and then just when you get to that dollar amount, either you or your partner moves the target, it's not enough. So there's that dog begging for the treat. And so what happens is, and this is why I was using the example of my previous marriage, is I was never good enough. No matter what I did. Yeah, I got date night going, but I didn't do date night right. Well, it's because the expectations of what she wanted and what I wanted were never in alignment. Dan, do you see how this comes full circle?
Yeah. And
sit down and tell me what you want in a relationship, and then we can pursue it with the time that we make for that pursuit. Go ahead. Excuse me.
the reward is mandatory. It is absolutely mandatory. Anybody that's setting goals is mandatory. And I could speak from personal experience. The most miserable people in the world are people that don't have a work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And previously owning franchises, right? It's work, 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 work. No time to enjoy the money that you make. No
Mm-hmm.
time to enjoy your family because it's always work, 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 work. You have to find time. And I made choices, right? To the point where I gave up franchises for it to pursue other things where I could have more time to myself and to my family. And yes, am I not making the money that I was making owning those franchises? No, but I'm so much happier. And so you have to find the work-life balance, and you have to find the rewards. It's mandatory.
But here, you just made a comment that I want the listeners to pick up on, because you said it very briefly, but I think there's a lot more to it. How much money do you need? So before you relinquished the franchises, you had to know how much you needed to survive, to get by. And yet most people can't quantify it until we get put into a situation where we're like, oh gosh, I'm going to lose my job. Right. So if I got to go find a new job, where do you start? Knowing what you have to make minimum before you go look for a new job. That's why I always say this is a constant reverse engineering. If you need $50,000 a year and you can build a side hustle that brings in 75 or 80, think about how wonderful of a feeling it is. You're doing the job that motivates you, something that gives you purpose, gives you reason, something that you enjoy. You've got it quantified. So if you surpass that plus 10 or 15, 20%, now you're just smiling from ear to ear because you're doing what you love. You're making more money than you need. And it goes back to, like you said, you made time for Sabrina and your daughter. So now you make that time and you realize, wow, your daughter's growing up quickly. She's going to be driving sometime soon. She'll be at your college sometime soon. It never slows down. Now, yeah, we've heard that ever since we were young. It is reality. But you made something that was just so incredibly powerful. And that was, you made a decision that the value of the money was not worth the time that you had to give up for it. And that's why I always go back to, time is the most valuable asset we have. Because, and people go, no, 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 it's the people. Well, if you don't make the time, you never get to see the people. If you don't have good health and you die early, you don't get to spend the time with the people. Because I agree, there's nothing more valuable than friends and family. But if you don't have the health to enjoy the family, and you don't have the time to enjoy the family, and it keeps going all the way back to time. The cooler not being on the front seat of the truck is because of time to get to the grocery store, or time to cook it, or time to eat it, or time to pack it, or time to unpack it and eat it. The idea of not hitting, that's why I said earlier, please don't say your goal is to become financially independent and get in shape. Write down the frustrations that have kept you from being able to do it, depending on your age, over the last 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30, 50 years. It's not a lack of goal setting. It's just the frustrations. If you look at those frustrations as hurdles, the hurdles have tripped you up. You never made it to the finish line of being fit, financially fit, relationship fit, whatever. So if we go back now, what we want to do to provide a solution for the listeners, and if you've stayed with us this long, thank you. I want you to stop. And again, I use Microsoft Outlook. What I want you to do in this order is, I want you to outline tomorrow, depending on when you're watching this podcast or listening, I want you to sit down literally hour by hour. When are you going to go? And we want to do them in this order, Dan. Number one is sleep. The very first thing I want to know is, and again, guys, I don't live in a glass house. It's taken a long time to get it to this point, but if it's important enough to you, you'll make it happen. What time do you have to go to bed to get at least 8 hours of sleep? And this is always a hard one, because as we've said previously on these calls together, on these pods together, we all are pretty comfortable on what time we have to start our day tomorrow. So again, we're back to reverse engineering. If you have to get up at 6, you've got to be asleep, not laying in bed, asleep by 10 o'clock to get those 8 hours of sleep. Now, what people have a tendency to overlook is, when I get those 8 hours of sleep, I'm already healthier. People don't look at it that way. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to get up at 4 a.m. so I can get that workout in. Well, you've actually taken a step backwards, not a step forward. Talk to anybody who's got adrenal fatigue. Talk to anybody who's dealt with anxiety and nervous breakdowns, because they're physically and emotionally exhausted. 8 hours of sleep. So if you know what time you're going to go get your day started tomorrow, it tells you what time you've got to be asleep tonight. And like we said, you have to be asleep. So I'm just going to use even numbers, Dan. 10 o'clock, you're going to bed. The process starts at 9, not at 9:55. It starts at 9 o'clock, because what we want to do is start creating wiggle room. Please don't give yourself 5 minutes to do something that takes 5 minutes. Give yourself 15 minutes. And I know you're like, Rob, what do you think I have? A lot of extra time? No, none of us do. We all have the same 24 hours a day. That's all we get. Yeah. But what's so fascinating is, and this is, again, gets into a little bit of the deep psychological side of it. When you know you've got an hour and you're doing exactly what you have on your schedule, you'll get it done quicker. Because Dan, how many times have you been at the track thinking about Sabrina, with Sabrina, thinking about work, at work, thinking about your daughter, with your daughter, thinking about your bank account? So we never get any happiness of where we're at because we're always somewhere else. Again, I know it sounds flaky, but to me, it's so powerful when you walk into the office and you know that you're there to do nothing but the office. You're more productive. This is something that I want the listeners to do. Do me a favor. If I walked into your bedroom right now, I should not see a checkbook. I should not see a dumbbell. I should not see a treadmill. I should not see anything relevant to anything other than going to bed. If I walk into your office, I shouldn't see a dumbbell, a fit ball, a jump rope. I should see nothing but what you need to do your job. Now, again, not all of us have the privilege and the luxury of having a gym in our house, but the idea here is we don't realize how we send so many mixed communications to our brain. Our brain's like, well, do you want me to lift those weights, pay that book, or pay that bill or go to bed? What do you want me to do here, Dan?
Yeah.
Now, the problem that you run into is, oh, shoot, I forgot to pay that bill. Well, it needs to be on your calendar. Oh, shoot, I haven't gotten to the gym yet. It needs to be on your calendar.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot, I'm exhausted. I need to go to bed. It should be on your calendar. And I know, again, it sounds like psychobabble. When you're doing exactly what's on your schedule, you'll be more productive in a shorter period of time. So now you're fitter, you're wealthier, you have better interpersonal relationships, and you enjoy your job more.
Yeah.
Now it's not always easy, Dan, because you've told me about some stories where people have dumped stuff on you. You know,
Oh, yeah.
they've got a 5-month program, a project that they want you to do in a month. That's what sucks.
Yep.
And
And
as
you
I
got to
always say,
adapt.
you have to adapt. But if we're prioritizing sleep first, what I want you to prioritize second is family time, not work. People screw this up all the time, is family time. Because if you don't know, like, for example, you rush off to work. Well, what time do you have to leave for soccer or gymnastics or go moto or whatever you're going to do?
Right.
See how we're trying to pound these square pegs into a round hole.
Yep.
And then what's left with that, drop in work. And people, again, they forget you got to add in the commute and the drive home. Dan, you and I love moto. I hear guys all the time. Yeah, I can moto about 2 hours a week. Well, they forget that it takes an hour to load up, unload, get dressed, ride, load, unload. Well, that 2 hours is now 5 hours.
Hour to wash your bike. If you're washing your bike properly, it should take an hour, just so you guys all know.
That's it. And that's where people screw up, because now they're like, oh, shoot, I gave myself 2 hours. It took 5. Well, where do most of us take the 3-hour gap away? We budgeted 2, it took 5, so we take it out of sleep. Well, now you start the domino going down the wrong path yet again, because you wake up tomorrow, you're not fully recovered, stress level is up, you're rushing, and now you're so tired you hit the snooze button 4 times. Now you're up just before you know you're going to be late, and now you're third gear pinned, and then you're just constantly, oh shoot, there's nothing in the fridge. That's okay, I'll hit the drive-through, and now we're back to square one all over again.
Yeah.
Time management against frustrations met with time management, you can fix it every time.
I want to kind of wrap this up too, Coach Robb, with kind of a final thought for myself anyways. What you said about making sure that you give yourself a window of time, for me, because sometimes I could personally feel defeated, if I don't meet a time, structure or something like that. And I think that's just kind of how we are as humans, right? If you can only give yourself 5 minutes to do something and it doesn't get done in that 5 minutes and you run over, now you feel like you've been defeated, and you have a tendency to be like, well, I guess I'll skip that today, or I'll make this adjustment, but then it's going to affect something 3 hours from now, right? So I think giving yourself that window of time to get these things done is very important. That way, like you said earlier, 9 times out of 10, you'll get it done sooner and earlier, and you'll actually have some extra time that you can, utilize maybe somewhere else. But keep from being defeated, make sure you give yourself plenty of time.
Plenty of time, and you have to keep recycling your priority list. And so, for example, I only do client calls on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So that frees me up Monday and Friday for new projects, new program development, videos, writing, research. But what I'm always constantly trying to encourage my entrepreneurs is you need to have a list, and we call it the 3-tier list. You have the bigger picture things that you think might be necessary for personal, professional, or financial, but then you have to slim those down. So for example, like when my kids were growing up, if they wanted something, we had a piece of paper, literally, I'm a little old school. We had a piece of paper and we had it on the refrigerator. So if they wanted something, they had to write it on the list, but there could only be 5 things on the list at one time. So, because you know how it is, especially with children,
Oh
right
yeah.
now, the most important thing is a Lego. And then next week it's, they want a new skateboard. And then the next, so no worries. But the thing is we had to have no more than 5 things. And if it was that important, then you had to take one of them off and you had to replace them. And they kept, and what we would do is whatever was number one on the list, they had to go get 3 prices for it. So they had to go do some research. So they wanted the skateboard. So when skateboard got to number one, they had 1 week to get 3 prices. And then we talked about how we were going to earn the money. They'd mow the yard, help me wash the car. They'd help me do open water swims with my triathletes. They'd hold pit boards on the side of the racetrack. Then what we would do is say, okay, it's going to take you X amount of time at this amount of money to earn the best price that you found for your skateboard. Well, as you know, as they're earning the money, skateboard wasn't really what they wanted. Now they want that Lego. So the Lego goes up. They have to go get 3 prices on it. And even though that's literally me working with my young boys growing up, I apply the same thing as an adult. What is it that I really want? What is right now? What do I think I have to have? Okay, put it on a list. It could be no more than 5. You got to get 3 price points and you have to save up enough cash to pay for it. Because a lot of times by the time you save the cash up, something else comes up, or maybe your needs, wants, and desires change.
Yep.
And that's where when we look at time management, it's like, okay, if you say to me, all right, Rob, you've got a new client interview, Jennifer knows exactly where on my schedule we have already carved out room for new client interviews. So if there are no new client interviews, I fill that with reading and research. And it just continues to go down. That's why we say we call it the trickle down effect. If you study entrepreneurship at all, they'll say a lot of times lists aren't how things get done. And I politely disagree with that, because if you don't have a list, you don't have anything to focus on. The problem is, and Dan, you said something that's very profound. Some people, their list is like their to-do list is so long, they get overwhelmed and don't know where to start. And that's because you haven't prioritized them. If you're looking at what you need to do right now, and you give yourself an hour and you get it done in 20 minutes, it allows you to go to the next thing. Yeah. But I say this whenever we go to trade shows or we go someplace that we call it new business development. What we always work on as a company is, okay, we're going to go to a trade show. We're going to stir up new business. What we do for literally, let's say the trade show is the first, second, and third of the month. We literally allocate 8 to 10 hours a week for the next 8 weeks to try to follow up on what business we started the first, second, and third. Because I know there's got to be a ton of subscribers that are listening to this. Their boss sends them somewhere, or maybe you as the boss, you go somewhere and you come back and all your regular workload is still there. But now you got all this new business development that you got to try to figure out. What do we back down to, Dan? Time. There's no time to leverage the new business opportunities because you're barely getting it done with the work that you were doing before. So what we say to the entrepreneurs is, if you're going to go to a trade show and develop a certain segment of business, I'll wrap it up with this. When a CEO tells me that he's just brought on a new BM, a new business manager, the first thing I say to them is, how much time is that business manager or that business development manager, BDM, what is that BDM going to free you up? And this is where I always catch CEOs all the time. So they hire me as their business development manager. I free that CEO up 10 hours. What's a CEO do? Starts another business, starts another business segment. Instead of saying, okay, if I'm going to diversify my business and I'm going to bring somebody in, this is where your perfect day comes in. If I hire somebody, it's to get me the time that I need to. You can drill this down as much as you want. You may be spending 3 to 4 hours a weekend mowing your yard and cleaning your house, where maybe you could delegate that for X amount of dollars, which allows you more time to do your side hustle, which gets you to where you want to be quicker. We're back to perspective and time management, the value of time. So if you don't know what you're trying to build the perfect business to be, and you haven't taken the time to break it down, you're going to have the same frustrations as in December as you had in January, because you didn't make a list of what you wanted to do, what's it going to take to make it happen, and then more importantly, when are you going to divide and conquer it? That's the only way it gets done. And that's what I wanted people to understand. Success is not guaranteed, but it's never accidental. Now, I'm not talking about the silver spoon, kids that get stuff that
Hitting
they
the
inherit.
lottery.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's, in fact, if you study the lottery at all, I mean, most people that are poor, when they win the lottery, they squander it within, what is the statistics? It's like 18 months to
Yeah.
2 years or something. If you don't know how to manage money, you'll go right through it. And same thing with time. And that's why I'm hoping this will make sense to people. Not everybody's been taught the value of time management, but I think it's kind of like when I work with young motocross racers. Hey, young racer, foam roll your legs. They're like, yeah, I'd rather watch grass grow. But if you say to them, hey, look, if I get this hamstring flexibility to be better, you won't dab your foot in the corner, that resonates with them. Of course, they're going to be eager to foam roll. Help me understand why I need to do it. Don't just tell me to do it. Don't just tell me to go find, you tell me what your perfect day is, your perfect job, how much is enough, your definition of being fit. And then we can divide it and conquer it. And then it comes back to, we divide and conquer through time management. That's it. That's it.
And once you do get, and I'll leave everybody with this, when you do get the time management, and I'm not perfect. Coach Robb is perfect, y'all. I'll say that Coach Robb's perfect, and here's why. I know that Coach Robb's schedule is tight, or not tight, but organized. I know that he's always got something on his schedule. So, for all you guys, Coach Robb and I, we don't talk very much, actually, probably at all during the week. If I have something to talk to him about, I save it for Friday mornings. We have our time cut out where, believe it or not, guys, we have a half hour before our show that we BS, and get caught up on things with.
Yep.
But Coach, if I call you during the week, it's because it's important and that I really need to talk to you about something, and you know that. And so then you answer, right?
Always.
So I respect your time, but also if it's an emergency or I need something right away, automatically when I'm calling during, in the middle of the week, I really need something because otherwise I would wait till Fridays, right?
Absolutely.
And so people will start learning your schedule and respecting your time as well once you get it figured out.
That's exactly right. You have to lead by example.
Yep.
And I think it goes both ways. Like with Jennifer, how can I be disappointed in Jennifer when she schedules a new client interview on a day that I didn't want it or I didn't have time if I'm not keeping my calendar, as you call it, tight and organized? It makes her job easier. It makes us all more productive. And I'm exactly where I need to be when, which allows me to be completely focused on that client during that process of, in this case, a new client interview. If I'm doing my client calls for 30 minutes, I've got their Garmin dashboard, all of their e-files are in front of me. That's all I'm focusing on. Now, if you walk in my office and you walk by and I don't make eye contact, that's not me being rude. That's because I'm so in the moment with that client, and that goes for certain blocks of time. And then I purposely have on there a half-hour break, and it literally says eat, hydrate. And so it stops and I start and stop and start. Now, I will say this, and I know we keep saying I'm going to close on this, but I will admit that this hyper structured schedule, if you want to, you could say it's the opportunity cost has cost me money. Dan, it's like yourself giving up some of the franchises has cost you money, but what you get for it is far outweighs. And I know that sounds a little fluffy, but once again, I'm not somebody who's naive that just says, oh, all of us have plenty of money, we're just mismanaging our time. I understand sometimes, I've worked a couple of jobs when I was newly married because of financial situations. We've all done that. We've all been there. What I'm saying is, if you don't understand the value of giving up something, now we're back to, why is it important for you to free up 5 hours a week? If your family isn't important, or your partner isn't important, or your athletics isn't important, then the 5 hours gets filled with frivolous stuff and or bad behavior.
Instagram, YouTube, Facebook.
Yeah, the bar, the cigar place, whatever. So now what ends up happening is, that's why I always say, and this is a very tumultuous comment, before you free up the time, tell me what you're going to do with the time that you're freeing up, because it's got to be valuable to you to put the effort in to create the time. But when the time is created and you're with your young child swimming in the pool, when you're with your young child at the track, when you're on date night, that's your reward for the time that you created, and not let something benign and completely a waste of time, i.e. social media, to creep into it, because then you're back telling me you don't have time to go to the grocery store, cook, eat, go to bed early, foam roll, spend time laughing. Think about that. Michaela and I talk about that all the time. And this doesn't mean that we're the best couple in the world. I'm not insinuating that, but it does blow my mind. We'll go to Acoustic Mike Wednesday night and we'll ride our bikes down there. And in all transparency, I bring my phone with me, but I was not aware of this. Hopefully this will be an aha for our listeners. Did you know that if you go to your iPhone and you put people in as a favorite, if you have your phone on do not disturb and they call, it will supersede the do not disturb? I did not know that.
Really?
I did not
I
know
didn't
that.
know that either.
So when I was newly separated, I always left my phone on because there was nights I didn't have my boys and I never wanted to miss their call. So I always left my phone on. So I'm hearing ding and ding and ding and ding and ding and ding all night long. And someone said, hey, put them on favorites, put them on do not disturb. The reason why I share that with you is when we go to acoustic night, my phone is in my pocket, but it never comes out. Because if it's one of our 3 children and they call, well, we always tell them call, don't text because it won't chime. If they call, I know that they need to talk. And that's no disrespect to anybody, but it's Michaela needs to know that that date night is so important that she is in front of me and we laugh. We enjoy laughter. We love to listen to acoustic music and all that goes with it. But my point is, if we surmise everything we talked about, I know what she likes and I do everything I can to fulfill it. She knows what I like and she does everything she can to fulfill it. Perfect example, Dan. The open mic acoustic night has sushi there. I know she enjoys Pinot Grigio and I enjoy their craft beer. So we go to that sushi bar because it has acoustic, we both like, has her wine, has my beer, and we both enjoy sushi. Now, can you imagine how frustrated she'd be if I wanted to go someplace that has nothing that meets her needs, wants, or desires?
Totally.
Yeah. And because it's on the calendar, she doesn't have to go, hey, are we going out to date night tonight? She's already dressed by the time she already knows.
Yeah.
And never once do I roll my eyes, oh shit, we got to go on date night. No, I'm looking forward to date night because on Wednesday night or Wednesday morning when I go into my office, I'm like, oh, how long is my day? What do I got? Oh, cool. Tonight's open mic night. Because I try to stay focused on today. I don't worry about tomorrow. Before I leave my office, I look at tomorrow. But my point is I just try to be in that moment. And I say this to Jennifer all the time. Like in our business, I only pay bills 1 day a month. It's the 3rd Friday of every month. Tends to fall around like the 15th to 17th. That Friday, if you go to my calendar, the first half of Friday is just blocked out for accounting. That's when I meet with my CPA. That's when I meet with Jennifer. Unless it is an absolute triple code red emergency, I've got a tickle file that says bills. Anything that needs to be looked at or paid goes in there. I only pay my bills once a month. It's a short period of time. I'm not stopping and starting and opening and closing and rebalancing. No. Now, has that taken years to get to? Absolutely. I'm not saying that arrogantly, but it works because I'm doing exactly that. And and we try to be very, with anybody that we owe money to, it will get paid on the 15th, I promise. And if you need to wait, go ahead.
I got to know one more thing before we leave.
Okay.
Keep mentioning this Wednesday night open mic acoustic night. Have you ever got on stage? Are we performing or what?
No. I have to admit, learning the guitar, I was talking to Daniel Blair about this the other day. I said, I'm so impressed with anybody who can play the guitar. And thankfully with YouTube, because what my thing was is I could get to where I understood the chords, but I didn't understand transitions. And when you're reading sheet music, if you're not in tune with that, no pun intended, I didn't know when I was supposed to transition. So no, I go, but I do study. Michaela teases me because I'm like, check out his hand. Look how quick he's moving up and down and around. And it's just so natural for them. And my ex-father and mother-in-law, they both have their master's degree in music. And we used to tease about it because they're like, well, how do you run a 4-minute mile? And I'm like, well, how do you sing that? Or how do you play that guitar? Like my ex-father-in-law, literally, he can play every single instrument made and known to mankind. And he can write music for every single instrument known to mankind. He can hear something on the radio, sit down and play it on the piano to the note.
That's cool.
And I'm like, that's a heck of a skill. And he's like, well, you've got your skills. And it was a cool in a relationship that we had. And
Yeah.
to long answer to your question, I'm still trying to learn the acoustic, and I'm enjoying the progress, but it's been slow and tedious. But if we keep it in context of what we were talking about, the joy of what a guitar, when it's strummed correctly, and knowing that once I finally do learn it, I can come to your house and play your guitar. I can go to Daniel's and play his guitar. That to me is what keeps me encouraged. That's my reward, is eventually it's going to be melodic, and I'll know that I had to work my butt off to get it. So I've earned it, and it's a beautiful thing. It doesn't come easy, but I didn't grow up 40 years of playing music. So that's why I enjoy it.
I just had to know if the next Oliver Anthony was upon us. So
no, I wish I could take credit for it, but what a beautiful song that is as well. So
Coach Robb, thank you so much.
thank you,
Episode
brother.
64, Success Isn't Accidental. Thank you guys, everybody, for subscribing and listening to the show. Please make sure you continue dropping in those comments in the section below. Send us an email if you have any questions. We'd be more than happy to get back to you and get your stuff answered. And Coach Robb, I'll see you on the next one.
Sounds good. Peace.